Buonasera, buonasera a tutti. I'm Marlene Nice. I'm from the U.S. Embassy in Rome, and I'm pleased to continue our collaboration with the Italian Space Agency on our program From Home to Space. We've brought together so many Italian and American experts to talk about space exploration, STEM education, innovation, and technology. And tonight, I wanted to let you know we're adding a little bit of new technology to our program. We're trying out an automatic captioning program. So let us know what you think about it after the program. You can write it in the chat on our YouTube page. Now, tonight, I wanted to give Francesco Rea from the Italian Space Agency a couple of words. Francesco?
Grazie Marlene, è ancora un piacere rivederti in questa iniziativa che ormai dura da qualche mese e credo che tutto il materiale che abbiamo prodotto in queste settimane, in questi mesi colpiti dalla pandemia diventerà un prezioso materiale che rimarrà sul web e che se sono insieme sul sito ASI, sui canali ASI e dell'ambasciata americana potremmo mettere insieme proprio per rendere disponibili. Questi video hanno un grande pregio, che restano. Al di là dell'ottimo successo comunque avuto da queste manifestazioni, continuano poi a essere visti, scrutati, approfonditi da chi appunto trova sul web questi appuntamenti. Vi racconto un aneddoto prima di ridare la parola a Marlene Nice di quanto hanno contato questi appuntamenti. Ieri parlavo con il presidente dell'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana e parlavamo appunto di questa collaborazione con la missione diplomatica statunitense in Italia e lui mi racconta e mi dice: sai, volevo vedere il lancio della crew di SpaceX, insomma della Crew Dragon di SpaceX, non sapevo dove andarla a vedere. Sono finito sul sito del quotidiano La Repubblica, che è uno dei più importanti d'Italia. Ho cliccato là sopra e mi sono trovato te che insieme all'ambasciata statunitense e a Roberto Vittori commentavate, diciamo, il lancio. Ecco, io non lo sapevo, però essendo uno dei principali newspaper in Italia, per me una evidenza di un risultato di una bella iniziativa che voi avete proposto e che noi siamo orgogliosi di aver seguito con voi. Dico a tutti quanti che ci sarà una trascrizione dell'inglese, ovviamente sarà in qualche fase forse imperfetta, ma aiuterà tutti noi a seguire con maggiore interesse i nostri ospiti che oggi sono particolarmente interessanti. Grazie Marlene Nice, scusami per essere stato un po' lungo. A te la parola.
No problem, Francesco. Thank you so much, as always, for being here with us. I wanted to mention that most of our program tonight will be in English. We have a speaker from the United States with us. Before we go, I'd like to introduce Matthew Hilgendorf. He's the head of Rome's Foreign Commercial Service Office. Matthew?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Marlene. For my Italian audience, buongiorno a tutti e grazie per la vostra partecipazione. Il nostro ufficio presso l'ambasciata fa parte del braccio del Dipartimento di Commercio americano, di cui missione include principalmente la promozione della esportazione dei prodotti e servizi provenienti dagli Stati Uniti e investimenti italiani verso gli Stati Uniti. I'll start by saying I'm from the state of New Mexico, which is where the city of Roswell is located. So I am familiar with how space, through visiting aliens, explores us. The commercial section of the embassy, we focus on several key industries, one of which is aerospace and defense. This strategic industry contributes greatly to both our countries' economies and is an area of traditional transatlantic cooperation. There are multiple US-Italy partnerships active today, both in the commercial and military spheres. No doubt, the commercial space economy offers significant economic and scientific potential. We can all attest to the importance that commercial space is gaining. New commercial space developments, like commercial crew launches to the International Space Station, are critical to the growth and expansion of the overall commercial space economy. We all witnessed, I think, an historic moment very recently, the launch of the astronauts to the ISS with the American SpaceX NASA partnership. These are exciting times. Space economy is showing resilience, also in COVID-19 world. And we can only imagine how it will be of growing importance going forward. The Department of Commerce Space Office of Space Commerce is leading the way to the space policy for the U.S. administration. We are very pleased to honor to have today with us Mr. Kevin O'Connell. Mr. O'Connell is the Director of the Office of Space Commerce in the United States Department of Commerce. He has more than 35 years experience in the U.S. government, in research organizations, and as an entrepreneur and business leader. He served as the Executive Secretary and Staff Director of NIMA, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, and he chaired the Federal Advisory Committee on Remote Sensing for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Mr. O'Connell's background includes also extensive experience in national security and intelligence matters, including assignments in the Department of Defense, Department of State, National Security Council, and the Office of the Vice President. He also spent a decade working in these areas at the RAND Corporation. In addition to writing numerous articles and op-eds, Mr. O'Connell co-authored in 2000 a book, Commercial Observation Satellites at the Leading Edge of Global Transparency. Director O'Connell, the floor is yours.
By extending a special thanks to my colleagues at the American Embassy in Rome, including our International Trade Administration colleagues, our consulates in Milan and Naples, and of course the Italian Space Agency for allowing this event to go on and adapting the circumstances to allow it to take place. As a preview, Matthew, I'm not sure I'll answer the alien questions on this call, so I'm sorry about that in advance. All kidding aside, we're living in unprecedented times, but times like these are important reminders that we're still bound by common goals and that we can still accomplish an incredible amount through the use of modern technology. It also reminds us that science and commerce are key connectors and that space continues to inspire and motivate people around the world. As mentioned, I'm Kevin O'Connell. I'm the Director of the Office of Space Commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce. That actually sounds like a fancy, modern name of an office, but in fact, my office was created over 30 years ago when the ideas of space commercialization were really purely visionary. And so we're proud to run that office today. Our office is the principal space policy coordinator within the Department of Commerce, but we're also the executive branch advocate on behalf of the U.S. commercial space industry. We work every day to foster the conditions for the economic growth and technological advancement of that industry. One of the other key functions that we're able to do is to leverage the many skills and talents across the Department of Commerce. So we work with our colleagues in ITA, both here and around the world, but also with NOAA, with NIST, and many other commerce organizations. Now, why is this so important? Matthew started us down this path. Because space capabilities are central to our lives in so many different ways, from improved internet access to finance and entertainment, to understanding crop futures and weather patterns. Space technologies are improving our daily lives and becoming even more critical to it. One industry study suggests that the economic impact, the output, if you will, of space technologies is around $5 trillion across a variety of space sectors. But how we access space and what we are able to accomplish in it is changing. Think about it. And again, Matthew, you started down this path. Even as we navigate the complex COVID pandemic, past space investments are enabling efficiency of response and recovery. Badly needed supplies are able to efficiently get to where they need to be, and space is allowing the remote monitoring of infrastructure and facilities in ways that keep people safe. Indeed, right now, on this particular call, this is enabled by space communications, as are other key functions like telemedicine and distance education for our children. And many in the space industry have contributed even more directly in our response to the crisis by converting manufacturing facilities to produce masks and respirators and other capabilities. Even as the global space industry, as one of every other industry navigates this crisis, we have been inspired by a continuing focus on long-term opportunities and benefits in space. And And I'll reiterate once again, I'd like to congratulate NASA and SpaceX on their recent launch of two American astronauts from U.S. soil on a U.S. rocket. That's the first time that's happened since 2011. Not only was the launch successful, but we also saw the ballet-like landing of the rocket's first stage on a barge in the ocean. Very, very impressive. This was not just a big step for the U.S. space program, but a very big signal about the growing importance of the commercial space sector, and a powerful sign about new approaches to government-industry collaboration. What's actually happening here? What we're witnessing, what some of you are directly participating in, is the application of commercial business practices and efficiencies to traditional government space models. And that is resulting in concepts like reusability, lean manufacturing, continuous learning, and others that are lowering the costs of space activities. The economics of space, in other words, is changing. It is incredible to look back the innovation and expansion in the commercial space industry over the past decade. Once the exclusive purview of governments, roughly 80% of space activity is now commercial in nature, and that number is only increasing. At the Commerce Department, we see the future of space as overwhelmingly commercial. Currently, the space industry is valued at over $400 billion. However, major financial institutions predict that by 2040, the space industry will be between $1 and $3 trillion. These numbers are not purely aspirational. What we can now see are a number of key factors that will enable that kind of growth, and I'd like to spend the bulk of my time today on those factors. First, we need to encourage continuous entrepreneurship and innovation in the commercial space industry. Space startups are popping up all around the world, creating new technologies that will redefine traditional space markets and hopefully impact life on Earth. One of the best things in my job at the Office of Space Commerce is that we see entrepreneurs all the time cross our doorstep. They're coming from companies large and small, and they're coming from people, inventors, if you will, who have worked hard on ideas, whether in their garage or their basement. We see many, many folks that are bringing new ideas to bear on space missions. I'd lump their activities into two categories. First, those who are trying to disrupt traditional commercial space models in areas like communications, remote sensing, navigation, others. And then another group of people who are trying to create wholly new activities in space, capabilities like robotics, propulsion, additive manufacturing, satellite servicing, and others. These capabilities will open up entirely new horizons of space exploration and space commerce. In my own career, I've seen incredible advancement in commercial remote sensing. Our entire planet is now imaged at least once every day, and there are significant developments in using remote sensing data to support market verticals in areas like mapping, insurance, agriculture, and many, many others. This is deepening our understanding of our world and presenting new scientific and commercial possibilities. We can talk about other areas like satellite servicing. Earlier this year, Northrop Grumman successfully completed the first commercial docking of their mission extension vehicle, returning an aging Intelsat 901 satellite back to commercial service for up to 5 years. This is a significant advancement in satellite servicing, but also portends near-term possibilities for refueling and repair of satellites, as well as the emerging area of active space debris removal. Slightly farther off, resource exploration. Some have said that the world's first trillionaire will make their money from the extraction and utilization of space resources. Countries like Luxembourg and the United States and others are looking at the issue of property rights in space to facilitate scientific and commercial opportunities. The President recently signed an executive order encouraging international support for the recovery and use of space resources. However, we do understand that technological innovation is not always a smooth road. The space market is becoming, if you will, a normal market. There will be successes, there will be failures, there will be mergers, and other normal space activities. Okay? Success will not come overnight, and it will not come to everyone. There will also be unforeseen economic realities that impact the advancement of the space industry. We find ourselves in that time right now, actually, with the crisis. However, this does not spell disaster for the commercial space industry. Instead, economic uncertainty can drive business and technological efficiencies that propel the industry forward. And we're already seeing that as the case. Not only are people achieving these new efficiencies, but they're actually keeping their eyes on the long-term future, as I mentioned earlier. The second thing that's needed, the second factor for the trillion-dollar space economy, are regulatory environments that encourage these entrepreneurs. In the United States, our Space Policy Directive 2 encourages government agencies to pursue activities to streamline regulations for the commercial use of space. The Department of Commerce recently released a rule on commercial remote sensing that marks a significant departure from previous policies on remote sensing licensing and regulation. That rule has been published in the Federal Register. It's publicly available, and it emphasizes increased regulatory transparency and limited restrictions. It's really a reflection of the advancements in the global remote sensing market and is designed to allow companies to innovate and bring services to market at speed. While regulation is often thought of as a purely government function, regular dialogue with industry is necessary and important, and that's one of the things we spend a lot of time on at the Commerce Department. Industry can help government understand the kinds of capabilities that are coming to market and their applications, their potential commercial applications. They can also identify areas where regulations impede innovation and commercial activities. The third thing that is needed is a robust finance and insurance ecosystem. Both of these communities have become much more sophisticated partners for the space community, providing needed investment and a shifting of risk. Prior to recent events, the last several years have seen a steady increase in financial support to the commercial space community. For example, venture capital invested $5.7 billion in 178 commercial startups worldwide last year, making 2019 the biggest year for private space investments, according to the Space Angels. Another company, Bryce Space and Technology, assesses that $18 billion has been invested in the commercial space industry, mostly in startups since 2000. Some space startups, of course, may need a broader portfolio of investments given the long and sometimes costly timelines for space technology development. Involving the larger traditional financial institutions will be essential to sustaining the longer-term development timelines for some space technologies. Space insurance will also be a critical enabler of the industry. As our understanding of the space environment deepens and our experience with new space concepts and business models matures, the insurance industry will be a necessary partner to encourage investment and reduce commercial risk. Fourth, we need to inspire and attract a wide and diverse range of talent to the space industry. This is so important. If the space industry is going to reach its multi-trillion-dollar potential, it will need all types of skills beyond the necessary technical expertise. That will include business case developers, intellectual property specialists, marketing and media developers, artists, and many, many others. If we only think about the technical dimensions of space, it will not achieve its full commercial potential. A story that I like to tell is that the department hosted an event and we were asking entrepreneurs to come forward to think about space and space commerce. And a woman came to the event who was a chef. And we said, why did you come to this event? And her answer was, I understand that food doesn't taste that good in space, and it's going to be my job to make it taste a lot better. And that's the kind of entrepreneurship we are seeing across the board, a much wider range of talent. While the space workforce is growing, it's not growing fast enough. Space Angels recently launched a space jobs website called spacetalent.org, connecting students and prospective employees with space companies seeking talent. Last year, Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency awarded its first ever space commerce grant to the Space Foundation to support the inclusion of minorities in the space industry. Diversification in the space industry will be key to realizing new technology and business insights and to broadening the space workforce. Fifth is that we have to improve our understanding of the true economic impact of space activities here on Earth. The space business is changing so rapidly that we have to do a better job accounting for it, in other words, to inform investors, whether they be government investors, national, regional, local, or entrepreneurs about the space economy. I was delighted to have an exchange last year with the Bocconi Institute at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. on this very topic. Within Commerce, we've actually turned to another sister agency, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, to begin the rigorous research on how to do this. And that has, in fact, attracted the attention of a number of economic statistics organizations around the world as other countries want to understand the specific economic impact of space on their economies. This is an area where we see opportunities for cooperation with international partners. Reaching our ambitious space exploration and space commerce goals will require cooperation and collaboration between governments and industry, and between space companies. To this end, we are currently planning the second Space Enterprise Summit in Washington with our colleagues at the State Department for later this year. Commercial partnerships will drive new space mission areas and help create new efficiencies in the space business. Public-private partnerships will drive innovation by unleashing commercial innovation backed by government funding and support. They will allow technologies to reach markets sooner and provide benefits to both government and commercial operators. Government-to-government partnerships will also be critical to achieve our common goals and objectives in space. The expansion of human exploration is one such area. You are probably familiar that NASA just released the Artemis Accords as part of our plans to return to the moon sustainably, including international and commercial cooperation. Space safety and sustainability is another key area where international partnerships will provide long-term benefits for all spacefaring nations. And this is the last topic I'd like to mention before turning to questions. Safeguarding our future in space for exploration and space commerce is a top concern. Improved space safety and an improved understanding of the space environment affects every space operator and will determine the future of the space industry and the future of all spacefaring activities. For commercial space operators, space debris and space safety are economic concerns. It impacts the ability to safely design and operate spacecraft, deliver commercial services, obtain funding and insurance, and drive revenue and profit. Space debris is perhaps the largest unknown when it comes to space operations. It reduces certainty and increases risk, and this is a top attention of the administration in Washington, along with our international partners. Our Space Policy Directive 3 charged the Department of Commerce, and specifically my office, with establishing a system for civil and international space situational awareness and space traffic management. Currently, this mission is handled by the U.S. Air Force. To allow the Department of Defense to focus on the security elements of space, and in recognition of the increasingly commercial nature of space, the private sector and international conjunction notifications will transition to the Department of Commerce no later than 2024. We're actually on track to do something a lot sooner than that. Currently, we're working to establish a data repository that will ingest diverse space data sets and allow us to apply rigorous analysis and visualization techniques to improve space safety for commercial operators around the world. Our data repository will start with the Department of Defense's unclassified catalog of space objects that's available today, augmented by a large number of commercial, civil, and international space situational awareness data. And that includes the commercial activities of our allies. We welcome international participation here by all of our partners and other like-minded nations. We met earlier this week, for example, with the EU and participants in the European Space Surveillance and Tracking Framework, including Italy, to discuss developments in this important area. Space safety and sustainability are key issues for all of us, and the more expertise we can collectively apply to the problem, the better. I imagine I speak for all of us that I say when a solution to mitigate the problem of space debris cannot come soon enough. To close, this crisis has helped us highlight the value of space and the positive impact it has had on our lives. It also highlights the importance of our space activities, whether space exploration and our pursuit of the growth of space commerce. Thank you again to the Italian Space Agency and my U.S. government colleagues for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'll look forward to questions. Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell, thank you so much. You've really covered a lot of information, a lot of material in a very short time, and I know that you could go so much more in depth on all of this. We had a couple of questions from the team, but I see that we already have one or two questions from our viewers, so let me give them some attention first.
Certainly.
Roberto Loreto asks, how would you see an operator providing protection of satellites as a new business to a budding concept in space security?
We're very enthusiastic about that. If you carefully read our Space Policy Directive 3, I talked about the notifications piece that Commerce will take over with regard to private sector and international operators. There's another piece of Space Policy Directive 3, though, that directs me to encourage the emergence of a new space safety industry. And we are starting to see companies not only thinking about improving the conjunction notifications, the warnings, if you will, about possible collisions in space. We're starting to see companies think more explicitly about other new safety activities in space. It's a personal observation only, but I often think for those that are on the line and remember the history of GPS, we took a capability that had been invested in by our military for many decades, opened it to commercialization. And now every day we all use capabilities in navigation. We don't even think about that anymore. You know, we're using our GPS on our cell phone, or we're using, Galileo or whatever system we're using. And I suspect that's exactly where we are with the space situational awareness issue. Improving the knowledge is a matter of first course. Creating a whole new set of space safety capabilities that are overwhelmingly commercial is the next step. The last thing I'll say about this, and maybe there'll be another question, what we know is the space debris problem is complex today, but it's bound to be more complicated in the future, in the near future, given some of the new mission areas that I spoke about earlier. And we want to encourage those new mission areas. So we have to deal with the safety piece in parallel.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Anselmo Bettio asks, could space economy and space technologies help to achieve the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? If yes, which space technologies are the most promising?
So again, I think that we see a slate of technologies that are overwhelmingly positive for economic growth and development. And we're seeing different technologies in different places in the world of commercialization. I've already referenced navigation, but obviously there are developments in weather. One of the things my colleagues in NOAA pay a lot of attention to are new approaches, space and analytics that actually help prevent severe weather impacts. This is a case where we're actually saving lives, helping decision makers make better decisions because of the quality of the weather data. I talked about remote sensing. We're seeing other new things related to space safety, et cetera. So there's a wide range of these technologies that are all different in different ways. We think those can relate to obviously national goals, but broader international goals as well.
Okay. And Julian Canettieri asks, how do you think this new space economy in which private actors are arising will impact on geopolitics in terms of competition or cooperation?
So I think there's actually a mix. Obviously, when I talked about the space economy and global space commerce activities growing, there will be both cooperation aspects and there'll be competition aspects as well. One of the things we're hoping to tee up at the Space Enterprise Summit this year, and again, it's a second Space Enterprise Summit after the work that we did together last year. International community came together. We're hoping to continue this discussion about the nature of cooperation and competition in space. As I said, from our perspective, the growth and diversification of space commerce is actually a stabilizing force in the overall geopolitical realm as well.
Okay, here's one from our team who wants to know, has COVID-19 had an impact on any of the planning?
And take it a little farther if you can, is on the planning for industry, for the government?
For planning for anything to do with space commerce.
Oh, no, I sometimes joke and say that somebody hit the accelerator in terms of the planning. The administration and the Space Council have continued relentlessly to develop new space policies. Some of you are aware that we're in the process of updating the 2010 National Space Policy. That's very important right now, in addition to other very technology-specific policies and issue-specific policies as well. So that has continued unabated through the crisis. That has not slowed us down.
Okay, someone with the initial CC asks, how many main operators can Earth orbit business still engage?
So it's an interesting question. You know, one of the things we see is the increased congestion in space, and that's the preamble to my conversation about space debris. One of the things that we are trying to accomplish across the administration is to do a couple of things. Number one, make sure people are aware of where the space debris is in the environment and provide notifications so that if they're at risk, they can get out of the way. In other words, the current slate of space debris as of today, you know, creates threats to billions of dollars of economic and government investment in space. So the first part of our policy is to try to improve our understanding of that space environment. Okay. We also know, though, that the growth in the number of space objects and beyond that, the complexity in space objects is changing very rapidly. So this is actually an urgent problem that we need to tackle very, very quickly. Again, we're dealing with it in Space Policy Directive 3. We're dealing with it with our allies, having conversations with our allies about how best to approach it. And I would say that what's interesting to me about the space debris, space congestion issue is there are so many different dimensions of it that can be worked. There clearly is the sensor dimension. And again, a number of our partners have talked about new kinds of sensors they could bring to bear from the civil agency side or even from their commercial partners. But there's a whole host of other issues having to do with analytics, data management, data organization of a large, growing, complex space debris data set that also lend themselves to people who work in artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that, visualization, and even new ways to do alerting and warning that are very modern ways of doing that, both human pieces, but also machine to machine pieces of the equation. So I don't know that I answered your question in terms of numbers, but what we know is it's not just the increasing numbers that's adding to the complexity. It's that people are pursuing different activities in space, which will further complicate the environment. So the space debris is something we have to deal with really immediately.
Okay, another one from our team, but I wanted to preface this one by saying I grew up in the post-Sputnik generation where the US woke up and said, we really have to do better at math and science. We need to catch up. We need to educate our students. And now that we look at the boom in the space industry, how can the education system in the US and actually internationally keep up with what's needed for this to continue?
I think that the NASA SpaceX launch was just another example of something that really inspires people of all ages to pay attention to the space business. But obviously we need, as I said, the science and technology and the math talents that are required for the harder technical aspects of space. But I think if we limit it to that, as I said in my remarks, I think that's limiting us too much. We need people from all walks of life who are thinking about ways to look at space. Interestingly enough, at Commerce, we see companies or people that are bringing companies together to focus on a number of aspects. Let me give you another example. There is a company down in Texas whose purpose is to train people what it will be like to operate in space. And you say, well, what does that mean? Okay, and so the person running the company likes to give this example. If you were a carpenter, what it feels like for you to hit a nail with a hammer on Earth is different than what it will feel like on the moon. And so she is creating an environment within which to demonstrate here on Earth what that feels like, you know, for different professions. So we're seeing companies come into the market who are going to help others understand what it will be like to operate in environments on the moon, on Mars, et cetera. So we'll need the technical talent, but as I said, we need a wide range of talent, and we need to be dipping into the education system, both to encourage that kind of talent to come forward, but also showcasing the various aspects of space.
So in addition to a diversity of talent, how do we make sure that there's true diversity in our programs? I mean, this is partially private, it's partially public funded. How do we really make sure that we have a diverse group of people who are working on these initiatives?
So actually, I mentioned one of the initiatives in our Minority Business Development Agency They have an annual conference that attracts minorities and other entrepreneurs to, among other things, the space business. We need to do more things like that. We are actually trying to plan right now an event that celebrates the role of women in the space program and tries to attract other women to participate in the space program as well. So this continuous outreach, continuing inspiring of people, through the things we do in space, not just on the government side, but on the private sector side as well, where you, as I said in some Senate testimony years ago, you can do exciting scientific and technical things, but you can also make money as well in doing that. And that's a different kind of motivator for some people. And so the good news is there's such a diversity of entrepreneurship and activities that will attract people of all walks of life, of all backgrounds, to the space business.
Thank you. Here's another question from Roberto Loreto. Is part of your mission to promote the use of space solutions and technologies to spread progress on Earth?
So it's absolutely to highlight the impact of space on Earth. I mentioned our initiatives on improving our understanding of the economic benefit. And I mentioned that we turn to our sister agency, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is a world-class organization that knows how to do this. The business is changing so quickly, I don't think we fully understand the impact. I mean, we can understand it in terms of sort of anecdotes and the things that we personally use space for. But I think perhaps outside this conversation, a lot of people don't understand the impact that space has on their daily lives. And so we have to do a better job understanding it. And we also have to do a better job explaining it to people that are really benefiting from it in many different ways.
And we have a program here that we run every year called Space Apps. It's a NASA program that really helps people look at some of the space technology that's been developed and how to use it on Earth. We had a lot of young people involved in that here, so we're helping to explain it as well.
Excellent.
More questions. Francesca Rizzi asks, will space activities be a field of collaboration between public and private? Or at some point, will the private totally devour the public portion? Will the public somehow exploit the private or the opposite? How do you see that working?
So it's a great question. Public-private partnerships, if you learn nothing from the NASA SpaceX example that we're watching live right now, it's the value of the public-private partnership. I believe that Administrator Bridenstine had a tweet the other day that talked about government leveraging out high-level requirements and then letting the private sector innovate. So we're seeing those public-private partnerships in many ways. Part of our response on the space debris issue, central to what I called Space Policy Directive 3, is an understanding that the commercial world has many, many capabilities to actually help mitigate the space debris problem, and hence the one aspect of the Department of Commerce focus. Will the private sector ever take over the whole space environment? Probably not. Government and private, both government and private sector activities are actually highly complementary. In fact, I've spoken more recently about a more sophisticated government approach to making investments in the market. If you're looking at some of the things that we're doing in the United States, for example, the incubators and the pitch days that the Air Force is putting together, those are areas where the government, with their own legitimate interests and needs, are spending money in the private sector. And there's some magic to how that actually takes place. You take people with interesting technical concepts, you have to expose them. They have to know how to run a business as well. And so you expose them to business ideas, et cetera. Okay. Government and commercial activities will be in space together for the long haul. It's a question of the balance. As I said, we see a lot of benefits to commercial activities being the overwhelming part of space activities in the future, but it's never going to take away the unique scientific and expertise that governments are mostly are overwhelmingly focused on in partnership with private sector entities.
And, before I mentioned the whole Sputnik issue and how we were in intense competition for many years to race to the moon, Do you see that there's more international cooperation, or is there still a fierce competition?
Well, we're seeing more cooperation. Again, we are focused intensely on what kinds of what does cooperation look like in space? What are the relationships that have to exist, between government partners? There's extensive existing partnerships between governments in space, the United States, its traditional partners, even emerging countries that are interested in space. We see so many countries that are interested in space, and there's so many ways that we can work with them. Everything from the government side, where there may be a unique testing facility, some specific knowledge, some things that typically would be shared between governments. But we also see the role of the private sector in encouraging private sector development with our partners as well. So at this point, we see a lot of cooperation. There's no doubt there's competition, and what we're going to try to do is keep competition fair. And allow companies to do what they need to do to deliver new services here on Earth and extend our goals into space, et cetera.
I remember people in the late 60s and 70s. I know I'm giving away my age here, but I remember people saying, whoever controls the moon controls the world. We have a few more good questions here. We have Gennaro Russo. He said SpaceX has definitely opened the service to government market.
Yes.
When do you estimate a business for business will start evolving, and how will the U.S. Department of Commerce stimulate it?
So the first question, we already see a number of activities that could come to market in the next year. You've seen the space tourism activities, which were projected as potentially early as late 20 to 2021. Not sure if those timelines have adjusted, but we see people already doing the planning for that. How we're doing that from our seat at the Commerce Department, as I mentioned, our primary role is advocacy on behalf of the commercial space industry. And so oftentimes when the government states a requirement, we're actually able to encourage them to think about using commercial capabilities. On the other hand, companies that are coming to market with brand new ideas are ones that we're encouraging partly to help them understand what the regulatory environment, what the legal and regulatory environments are for doing those things, for helping them get exposed to the right people inside the rest of the U.S. government, to the ideas that they have, to understand any impediments that exist in the way, and trying to get those removed so they can pursue it. So that public-private partnership is critically important. And the private sector role of bringing wholly new missions to market, we see that happening literally as we speak. Last October, we did an event at Commerce in person, obviously, on the unique challenges of small business space startups. And we're thinking about doing that again in a virtual session like this, and we'll invite folks to participate, really to look at what does it take for these new mission areas to actually become achievable. And so those are among the things that we're doing at Commerce to actually help stimulate that piece of the space economy.
Okay. Roberta Loreto, she's one of our regular viewers, and she's a fellow space enthusiast. So we get a lot of questions, and we appreciate that. From your perspective, how will international cooperation in space look like in the near future, in particular among USA, the EU, Russia, and China? What trends do you see?
So we do see international cooperation via things like the Artemis Accords. You've seen those take place. We've had a conversation. We continue to have a conversation on space at the United Nations in COPUOS about things like space safety and sustainability. There are different views on how to approach that. The United States views that those should be based on bottom-up voluntary principles, not a top-down heavy governance approach to this. We think that there's too much opportunity that could be missed by that second approach. We should do it based on what experiences we are having collectively. Obviously, there are sources of disagreement in terms of space commerce, but also in terms of the relationship between commerce and security in space. And so we have to work through some of those.
Okay, let me ask you this next question from Impresario. And if it isn't clear to you, we'll ask for some clarification.
Okay.
The question is, as S/C numbers will grow dramatically in Leo, a mega constellation, what should be the correct bias for a regulation granting international access and utilization of service volumes?
So I'm not fully sure I understand the question, but I'm going to take a swing at what I think the question is about. As space becomes more congested, what we're going to have to do is to do a better job of managing that space environment. The efforts that I talked about at Commerce are really overwhelmingly about improving our awareness of what is happening in space. In other words, giving you as an operator a much more precise understanding of things that could put your capabilities at risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the question is more about managing space traffic over time. Our original approach, or initial approach, I should say, to that is about improving our understanding of the space environment. That will inform the kinds of regulatory instruments that could be brought to bear. Obviously, if you've heard this throughout my remarks today, we believe that regulation should be very much a light touch and should continue to stimulate innovation in space, not squash it. I hope I got close to the question when the answer with that.
I hope so too. Impresario, I hope that was it. S/C stands for spacecraft, he just clarified for me. So
got it.
Let us know if we answered your question properly or adequately. Meanwhile, from ASI TV, which are friends at the space agency here in Italy, they ask, do you think it will be necessary to create specific laws for the next space exploration?
Well, we certainly need to look at the governance regime, and the Artemis Accords, of course, are all about setting a framework for responsible behavior on the moon with regard to space exploration. And obviously, my boss, Secretary Ross, has talked about the need for improved, he calls them rules of the road for new missions like space exploration. Again, I think one of the things, like any other area, technology tends to move a lot faster than law and policy. And so we see a whole host of new mission areas that we have to give thought to about the governance of space. And some of that will involve law, and some of that will involve regulatory activities and things like that.
Yeah, that definitely needs to be the next step of international cooperation, because it's not one country anymore looking at this.
Right.
And if I can give my age away again, I always remember Star Trek mentioning the Martian Chronicles and the the Martian laws that they enacted back then.
Right.
In the future. Anyway, Impresario says thank you, because you did answer his question perfectly. So
right.
Thank you again. I have one from Gennaro Russo. He said, space tourism, Virgin is mentioning a backlog of 600 bookings. That's Virgin Galactica. We had a speaker, Enrico Palermo, was here a few weeks ago.
Excellent.
He said the same number as it was in 2013. Do you see a measurable market for suborbital space tourism involving more than just a few persons? So it doesn't really look like it's grown, that there's more of a backlog since 2013.
So I think you're seeing a couple of things. I do think there's a market, and in fact, there are folks coming to the market with. There's a company that's coming to market with an idea of if you will, a space hotel, if I can use that term, in anticipation of folks to do that. Obviously, the first missions to space for those pioneer space tourists are going to be the suborbital flights. Some people will wait until they've gotten beyond those initial waves. Some will wait until the cost of doing that comes down. But we actually do see a market. We see a lot of interest in folks going to space. Some will want to go to space and stay in space. Some will want to be the early participants in what we call sustainable return to the moon. So we do see that happening, actually.
Okay, I have another question that came through our team. And it says, can you please expand on the goals of exploration in short and long term from the space commerce point of view?
Sure. Commercial entities are going to be vital, as the example of the Demo 2 mission has already shown. Commercial activities are going to be vital to getting back to the moon sustainably, making use of, creating the sustainable environment as we stay on the moon. Everything from things that allow people to live there as comfortably as they can, new missions that they're going to do. We believe that commercial entities are going to play a key role in space mining and resource extraction, as I mentioned earlier, which is a game changer. I don't see why that same trend won't continue as we move farther out into the heavens, including Mars. We're going to have to find faster ways to get to places like Mars, for human purposes. And commercial entities are going to be a key part of all of that. And then there are going to be missions and ideas that people are proposing that we've not even thought of yet to help us do that more efficiently, to go faster, to again, make life hospitable in places like that. We see the commercial world playing a big role in that.
And some of our viewers say that they really see space research as benefiting humanity, and maybe that could too much private interference in this realm, could that affect that in some way?
Certainly space research benefits all of humanity, but we see the speed of private research and private activities actually being very beneficial for advancing all of our knowledge about activities in space. So I don't quite see it that way as being an either or. I see the work that the commercial sector will do in space. And sometimes people are mistaken to think that commercial activities and scientific activities are mutually exclusive. They are not. What we are talking about in many different areas, exploration, space debris, et cetera, requires exceptionally exquisite science and research. And so I don't believe it's an either or. I think we will benefit in particular because commercial activities can go faster and perhaps expose us to scientific research and findings in areas which we would not get to a longer period of time via government research funding.
Do you see this as one of those research or developments, technological developments that can get out of hand quickly? Like, look at the explosion of the internet and everything that we do online now, including our program today. How much regulation are we going to need, and how can we keep up with that in the future?
Well, so again, as I started before by saying that one of the things that everybody on this call, I think, appreciates is no matter what we do during the day, we are making use of space in so many ways, and we don't even think about it that way. It's what I call the paradox of space. On the one hand, we're relying on it in more and more and more areas. On the other hand, we don't explicitly think about it as something that's happening from space. And so I would not use the term out of hand. We're seeing a tremendous amount of energy and entrepreneurship in the space area. That is all welcome. I haven't seen anybody cross my path yet with a dangerous idea, and that's where you bring in governance. When you think about promoting and advancing space commerce, that does not mean you throw away safety or security issues. It means you manage them and govern them appropriately. So the phrase "out of hand" is not one that I'm expecting to hear in this area for in a very long time.
So we'll call it a boom instead.
Better.
Okay. I want to jump to a question, and then I'll go back to a couple before that, because this one seems to go along with what we're talking about. Will any space militarization pose threat to a public-private partnership in space?
So obviously, folks have asked the question about competition in space. The United States has created the United States Space Force, as I'm sure you're all aware. And that is partly designed to deal with a growing, a more complex security environment in space, to earlier questions about competition. But it's also designed to protect the investments that are being made in space. And so from the commerce perspective, we see the role of the Space Force as protecting, the many investments that we are all making in space, making sure that there's a safe and secure in a different way than I've talked about safety in this conversation earlier, the safe and stable environment in space for us to participate in. as I said earlier, I think the extent to which space commerce grows and diversifies actually encourages more stability in space. And so we see the Space Force as a natural partner in helping encourage the things that I've talked about in this call.
Thank you. Luciano Police asks, what do you think are the necessary non-technical skills for new space players, such as communication, social science, entrepreneurship, teamworking, ethics, and ecological awareness?
So all of those things, and I'd start with a creative imagination as being one of the most important things. Again, we're seeing lots of folks imagine new business concepts, new business ideas for space that extend beyond the technical. And as I said before, we need as much technical talent as we can get and want to encourage that. But we want to encourage people from other walks of life to think about how their specific skill set should be applicable to space in any one variety of ways. I will say one thing, as I've looked at entrepreneurs and the way we've dealt with entrepreneurs in the United States, there are a couple of skills that we find to be very, very important. All of us have met people who are, technical wizards, have a brilliant technical concept. But in the world I'm talking about, they have to have two other capabilities. They have to be able to communicate quickly. In some of the incubator efforts that we see in the United States, companies are asked to give 5-minute presentations. If you're familiar with the show Shark Tank, people are asked to give 5-minute presentations to cover their entire technical concept, their entire team, and the team is very important, by the way. The teamwork and the team are very important, and their entire business plan in a very short period of time. And those can be win or lose moments, so you have to be able to communicate. The second is business acumen. How to run a business in the world that I'm talking about is also very, very important. How do you think about meeting payroll, and how do you think about hiring, and how do you think about insurance and all those other things? Those are among the many skills that are important for for the kinds of activities that I'm talking about, in addition to the ones that the questioner actually asked as well.
Okay, so we're at the end of our program now. Through the team, I have just one last question asking if spacetalent.gov startup event will be open internationally.
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a Space Angels. That's a private website. Again, we're going to sponsor a couple of events at Commerce over the next few months, one of which is the Space Enterprise Summit. And again, I'll emphasize that if I had to guess right now, based on circumstances, we're looking at that late September. And why that's important is we're going to bring the international community together this year, as we did last year. And we want to talk about partnerships. We want to talk about the many issues we've talked about in this conversation. We're going to host it at Commerce this year. It was hosted at State last year. But we want to host it at Commerce this year. And so we'll keep you apprised on when we pin that date down and the agenda. We know we're going to be talking about issues like space safety. We're going to be talking about the role of intellectual property protection for space activities. And a handful of others. So we'll make sure folks are apprised when we're planning that activity, and hope you can join us, hopefully in person at that particular event.
We all hope so too. As much as we're enjoying our time on Zoom and WebEx and our other platforms, we look forward to the day when we can shake hands with our contacts again.
Absolutely.
We answered a lot of questions. We had a lot of information. Before we go to our closing comments, I wanted to ask Matthew Hilgendorf to come back and if he had any last words to say.
Good. Thank you, Marlene. Director O'Connell, that was fantastic information. I took many notes. I just wanted to make a comment, which is that it just occurred to me as Director O'Connell said that we have to perhaps do a better job of explaining the impact of space in people's daily lives. It occurred to me that space is an environment that everybody can see, and therefore it's real to everybody. It's a little different than some of the other environments that require cooperative research and stewardship and exploration. I'm thinking of the North Pole, the South Pole, the oceans. Those are important, obviously, in environments, but space is something we can all see. Every single human could see it, and therefore it really is real to everybody. Yeah. It just occurred to me that it's unique in that way. And then there's the commercial driver of this business, this market, this opportunity could be as big as $3 trillion annually by 2040, and that's an incredible economic driver, and that means people's lives, their employment, their professional achievements could be related to space in the future. Only to say it's been an honor to share this virtual stage with Director O'Connell and the Italian Space Agency, and I want to thank especially the Public Affairs section of the embassy for hosting this fantastic program. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has as well, and thank you to all. Back to you, Marlene.
Francesco, do you have a few words, una parola o due?
Sì, giusto per ringraziarvi ancora una volta di una bellissima lezione molto interessante. There, Mr. O'Connell, your lesson has been really interesting, and I would like to say thank you to Matthew Wigendorf. Allora, è finita anche questa oggi. Abbiamo lasciato qualche domanda fuori, no, Marlin, come al solito. Alla fine sono sempre una dimostrazione di un bel prodotto che per fortuna la rete ci permette di mantenere lì a disposizione di altri. Che dire, grazie a tutti e grazie a te, a Marlina, a cui lascio di nuovo la parola per i saluti finali. Grazie ancora.
Okay, grazie, Francesco. I just have one thing to say. This is the second to last program that we'll have in our series From Home to Space. Next week, we will have NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson as our special guest. So I hope you'll join us for one last program in English, and our whole team will be back for that. I hope you liked our new automatic captioning. Leave us a little note about how it worked for you, if it's a good addition to our program. And I just wanted to say one last thing to Francesco. Faccio tanto di cappello a Francesco e tutti esperti che hanno fatto il nostro programma. I learned that new phrase this week, so I wanted to share that with you. Mr. O'Connell, thank you again for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule with this huge program. Matthew, appreciate you joining us at the U.S. Embassy's program on From Home to Space. And Francesco, once again, thank you. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you, pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.